We were a bit confused about all the fans, or I'd say lack thereof of all the fans in Stadium 2.
The 2026 Miami Open is already underway, and before a single ball was struck on center court, a controversy was quietly brewing behind the scenes. Tommy Haas, the man who turned Indian Wells into the 5th Grand Slam, just fired back at the way tournaments have been handling Alex Eala. And if you read between the lines, it lands like a direct shot at the WTA. Here's what makes this genuinely interesting. Haas watched Eala draw record crowds at Indian Wells just days ago, a 16,000-seat stadium packed wall-to-wall with Filipino fans. Then he made a pointed public statement about how tournaments have been scheduling her. Not a whisper, a statement that cuts straight through the noise. Meanwhile, Miami Open director James Blake was forced to go on Tennis Channel and publicly admit he got it wrong last year, that putting rising stars on the smallest court was a mistake he won't repeat. But why did it take a public lesson for that correction to happen? If you're someone who actually follows what's happening beneath the surface of professional tennis, subscribe right now, because this one goes deeper than the headlines suggest.
19-year-old lefty Alex Eala from the Philippines could be the next big thing in pro tennis.
This is the goal
My goal is to be able to integrate myself into the WTA circuit more and to be able to handle myself better on court.
Bolted into the spotlight last month.
Here's the full story, and it starts much earlier than you think. And it starts with a court, specifically the wrong one. When Alex Eala arrived at the 2025 Miami Open as a 19-year-old wildcard ranked 140th in the world, nobody in the tournament's scheduling room was losing sleep over where to put her. She was an unknown quantity on paper, a young Filipina given a wildcard entry more as an opportunity than an expectation. So the WTA and Miami Open organizers did what they always do with unproven players. They assigned her matches based on ranking logic, not cultural reality. That decision aged very badly, very quickly. Eala didn't just win her first match, she won the next one. Then the one after that. She took down Jelena Ostapenko, a former French Open champion. Then Madison Keys. Then, in one of the most stunning upsets of the entire 2025 season, she walked out and beat Iga Swiatek, the world number 2 at the time, 6-2, 7-5. A 19-year-old wildcard ranked 140th, dismantling one of the most dominant players the WTA has produced in a decade. In straight sets, the Filipino fanbase didn't wait for the tournament to catch up. They were already there, loud, passionate, and completely overflowing whatever court the scheduling sheet had assigned. Organizers found themselves scrambling. The infrastructure wasn't built for this level of demand around a player nobody had officially recognized as a draw yet. Eala eventually lost to Jessica Pegula in a grueling 3-set semifinal. But by then, the damage to the tournament's scheduling credibility was done. She had become the first Filipina in history to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal, and the venue had repeatedly failed to match the moment. That should have been the lesson. It wasn't absorbed fast enough, because 8 months later, the exact same problem showed up at the Australian Open in January 2026. Eala walked into Melbourne Park no longer a wild card. She was a ranked player, a known quantity, someone who had spent the back half of 2025 building on her Miami breakthrough with a WTA 125 title, Grand Slam main draw appearances, and a Southeast Asian Games gold medal. The Filipino tennis community had grown substantially. Her profile had grown substantially. None of that was a secret. And yet the Australian Open scheduled her opening round match on Court 6. Not a show court, not an arena. Court 6, a venue with limited seating capacity that could not come close to accommodating the crowd that turned up wanting to watch her. Hundreds of fans lined up outside Melbourne Park and simply couldn't get in. Those who made it inside were packed beyond comfortable capacity. Those who didn't stood outside following updates on their phones, having traveled in some cases enormous distances for a match they never got to see. Fan reaction online was blunt. One supporter called the decision just dumb. Another directed frustration specifically at the WTA, saying the organization should have done its research and pushed for a better stage. A third said she deserved at minimum an arena court, not a side court better suited to a qualifying round. the Australian Open is not a WTA-run event, but the WTA has influence over scheduling discussions, and the broader point stands. Across multiple tournaments, at multiple stages, the same institutional failure kept repeating itself. A player with a documented, measurable global fan base kept getting assigned courts built for players without one. This is the context that surrounds what Tommy Haas said after Indian Wells wrapped up in March 2026, and this is why his words carried the weight they did. Haas had just watched Eala make her debut at the BNP Paribas Open, an event he directs, an event often described as the most prestigious combined ATP WTA tournament outside the Grand Slams. She beat Diana Yastremska. Then she walked out and defeated Coco Gauff, one of the biggest names in women's tennis, in front of a crowd that turned the Indian Wells Tennis Garden into something that looked and sounded more like a national celebration than a standard third-round match. Haas had never seen the 16,000-seat Stadium 1 carry that kind of energy around a player at that stage of a tournament. He said so openly. Speaking to Tennis Channel, he fired back at the culture of ranking-based scheduling that had consistently failed to accommodate Eala's real-world drawing power. He pointed to the record crowds across the entire Indian Wells fortnight, singled out the Filipino fan base specifically, and made the argument that this generation of emerging stars, Eala included, was reshaping what professional tennis looks and feels like at the elite level. His point was direct: the sports infrastructure needed to stop treating popularity as a secondary consideration behind ranking arithmetic. That's not a soft observation. Coming from a tournament director of Haas's standing, someone who runs an event that has won the Best Masters 1000 designation from both the ATP and WTA for 9 consecutive years, it carries institutional weight. He wasn't venting to a microphone in passing. He was drawing a clear line about where this sport is failing its own growth. Eala lost in the 4th round to Linda Noskova, but she left Indian Wells having beaten a top 5 player and having drawn the kind of fan base engagement that most veterans on tour never generate at any point in their careers. The result on the scoreboard told one story. The crowd told a completely different one, which brings everything directly to Miami 2026 and to James Blake's very public moment of accountability. Blake, the former world number 4 and current Miami Open tournament director, went on Tennis Channel ahead of the tournament and was asked point-blank whether Eala and João Fonseca, the Brazilian teenager who has become the ATP's equivalent phenomenon, would be scheduled on center court. His answer was candid in a way that implicitly acknowledged just how badly things went the previous year. He said, laughing slightly at himself, that last year taught him Fonseca needed to be on stadium court, and confirmed he would be. He then addressed Eala directly, describing her Miami run last year as a coming-out party, acknowledging the scale of international interest both she and Fonseca now command, and stating that Miami's identity as a multicultural city made center court not just appropriate but necessary for both of them. That admission matters more than it might appear on the surface. Blake didn't frame it as a strategic decision made well in advance. He framed it as a lesson learned under pressure, which means the scheduling error last year wasn't an oversight someone caught in a planning meeting. It was a mistake that played out in real time in front of thousands of fans who had every right to expect better. And for a WTA 1000 event with the profile and resources of the Miami Open, that gap between expectation and delivery is exactly what Haas's broader criticism was pointing toward. Now Eala arrives in Miami for the second time under completely different conditions. She is seeded 31st. She is ranked world number 29, a career high. She has a first-round bye. She is no longer a wild card being given an opportunity. She is a seeded player defending 390 ranking points from last year's semifinal run. Lose early, and she risks dropping outside the top 50. The stakes this year are not about breaking through. They are about proving the breakthrough was the beginning, not the peak. Her path through the draw could set up a third-round rematch with Iga Swiatek, the same player she dismantled here 12 months ago. Swiatek enters Miami as the second seed. If both players progress as expected through the first 2 rounds, that match would almost certainly land on center court. It would also be one of the most anticipated matches of the entire tournament. carrying the weight of a rivalry that has only just started to take shape. Beyond Swiatek, Eala's section of the draw features Karolina Muchova, Klara Tauson, and potentially Mira Andreeva or Victoria Mboko, deeper in the bracket. None of those matchups are easy, but Eala has spent the entire 2026 season demonstrating she belongs in the conversation with those names, reaching quarterfinals in Manila, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai, and pushing deep at Indian Wells before the Noskova loss ended her run. The form is there, the ranking is there, the crowd will absolutely be there. What remains to be seen is whether the sport's scheduling decisions will finally match the reality on the ground, or whether the pattern that Haas fired back at after Indian Wells will quietly reassert itself the moment the pressure of a single tournament week fades. That's the real tension sitting underneath this Miami Open, not just whether Eala wins matches, but whether the institutions surrounding professional tennis have genuinely absorbed what her rise means for how the game should be presented, managed, and scheduled at the highest level. Haas saw it clearly at Indian Wells. Blake admitted the failure openly before Miami began. The question is whether acknowledgement translates into consistent structural change, or whether the next tournament on the calendar makes the same mistake all over again, and someone else has to fire back. If this breakdown gave you a perspective on the Miami Open you weren't getting anywhere else, drop a comment below with your prediction for Eala's run this year. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Every week this channel goes deeper into the stories professional tennis doesn't put in the press release. You don't want to be catching up later.